Welcome to the Fit Vegan Podcast, the show where we help you optimize your health, fitness, and mindset on a whole food, plant-based lifestyle. My name is Maxime Sigouin. I am a former triathlete, powerlifter, bodybuilder, and basketball player, and I've been vegan for over 9 years. I'm also the founder and CEO of Fit Vegan Coaching, which has helped over 500 vegans from 20 different countries to completely transform their bodies and their health. I'm excited for you to hear today's episode. Let's get into the show. All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Fit Vegan Podcast. Today, we have a Fit Vegan success story episode. We're joined by one of our Fit Vegan superstars, Dr. Nancy. Nancy, how are you doing today?
Good, thanks.
Good. Excited to have you on the show and get to chat about, how your journey went, how the whole thing went for you.
Okay, sure.
Awesome. So I always like to get started with a little background on you, right? Simply because people's main reason as to why they can't necessarily transform, start exercising, or start potentially just watching nutrition and eating a little bit healthier is they feel they have too many things on their plate, right? But I always like to show that everyone that is in the program is human and has other obligations besides working out and meal prepping all day and just focusing on that one specific area of their life. So you might give me a little background as to who you are and kind of where you're at before you join the program.
Okay. Mine as an older person approaching 70, my tale is somewhat different than a lot of what I see on the chats and the group meetings and such. And that I'm retired. But my life has always been very full. I help take care of my grandchildren. I visit and help out my parents in their 90s. My husband and I travel a lot. So yeah, I mean, my life is fairly cluttered, but in a good way. But I certainly, I think ultimately, especially now at this stage in the program, I didn't find it as challenging as some who, have young kids and are working 50 hours a week. Yeah, I mean, it certainly was a switch for me, following the blueprint.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what got you to the place where you felt like you needed to do this? Like you felt like you needed to make a change. I'm always curious as to people's pivotal moment.
I think, like many I've listened to that you've interviewed, I too was a Chef AJ follower. I respect a lot of what she has to say, but so I had been vegan for a few years, and prior to that I was vegetarian and or following the Mediterranean diet. And so I was trying to adhere to her game plan and also was very active. I did strength train before. I was doing primarily about 4 or 5 days a week of this body pump class. And I wasn't, though my weight was okay, I wasn't seeing any change. And, I'd been taking these pump classes for almost 20 years and, trying again to adhere to this diet that was primarily carbs, very low protein, of course, plant-based. So when I saw you on Chef AJ's show, it was kind of like a light bulb, that this may be something that I really needed to focus on body composition in ways that I hadn't before. So that sort of led me to taking the plunge because I knew something was wrong and it was frustrating to me. And I like the idea of the guidance because I didn't sort of want to hurt myself. I have sort of I mean, like everyone, I have a bad back and stuff, and I had back injuries and such. But so I just sort of like the idea of having some guidance, a program to follow.
Yeah, beautiful. So it's very common, right? What you share then in the whole food plant-based world specifically to be told you can eat as much as you want, keep it clean. It is primarily high carbs because a lot of the plant-based foods tends to be a little
Mhm.
bit more higher carbohydrates, and the focus on protein is very minimal, which has
Mhm.
its place. Like it will make you healthy and it will keep you healthy even with a low protein consumption. It's simply that if you're trying to shift your body composition, it's one of the criteria that has to be brought up, right? That has to be paid attention to in order to accomplish that shift. So I'm curious. Like you've been vegan for a few years, you're kind of using the approach of high carbs, slightly lower protein, or not necessarily lower, but just not necessarily putting an emphasis on it.
Right, right.
How have you seen your body shift and potentially how you're feeling shift throughout the course of the program by following this new nutrition structure?
Um, for me, I think it's been pretty noticeable. I didn't have, I'm one of those people that you have a number in your program who didn't have a lot to lose.
Yeah, I think it
And
was 4 pounds. I looked it up before the
yeah,
call. Yeah.
and so uh it's interesting to me that, I mean, like again, what I've heard you talk about, though it wasn't that much to lose, I definitely have changed my shape. And
Hmm.
my definition, particularly if I flex my arms, in the mirror, is, there's more definition in my arms, in particular, than there ever has been.
Hmm.
And I'm lifting heavier weights than I ever have been. With the pump class was largely the barbells,
Yeah.
and with a lot of sort of lower, I was using lower weights and higher repetitions. So now just using, not being afraid to use higher weights with the free weights in particular. um, I have the strength, and I'm noticing a big difference. I mean, I really didn't, I've always sort of prided myself. This was kind of my profession. I mean, dealing I mean, I had to have a background in nutrition in the kind
Hmm.
of work I did. And, I really didn't know that you needed, a lot more protein, and particularly protein like tofu. I never had prepared tofu before this program.
Oh, interesting.
I was largely having, lentils and beans, and even that in short measure. I mean,
Hmm.
so again, I think I was pretty, adequate protein, but on the low side,
Yeah.
even, for my body weight. So it was kind of amazed how much my composition changed. And interestingly, even though we don't do, the workouts don't often include a lot of specific works like on the abs. I was always very sensitive about my abs. Again, I didn't have grave expectations at 70. I didn't expect to close to 70, have a six pack, but definitely my abs are, look different, and clothes are fitting differently. And there's just a leaner look that
Hmm.
I'm cognizant of in this process.
Yeah, you can. I looked at your photos before. You can definitely tell in your new photos, which are, post reverse dieting, post
Mhm.
us having increased food, that there's a more ab definition. Um, so I'm happy that you got to experience that. I'm curious, did you notice any difference in the weights that we're using for your pump class? Because from what I understood, you weren't necessarily actively lifting weights before. It was more that you were doing classes, and now we added the strength training. Have you noticed a difference in the weights that you've been using in your class? Because you basically have data from 20 years. So I'm curious to see how it
Well,
changed.
I virtually stopped taking the pump class. I remember having that initial conversation with you, saying, "No, I don't want to leave. These are my friends. This is my community." And I found that I had to kind of make some choices. I
Mhm.
mean, yeah, I like hanging out with them, but it's not really doing anything for me. And
Hmm.
so I take that now and then, and I take the instructor's abs class, fairly regularly. But and the once or twice I have, yes, I am lifting heavier on the barbells. But
Yeah.
I never thought, for instance, that I would be lifting, bicep lifting 15 pounds, on each,
Yeah.
hand. I wasn't doing that. I was lifting 8 on free weights
Hmm.
in the pump class, and now I'm lifting 15, working up to 20, 20 each.
Yeah.
So big difference.
Significant difference, right?
Yeah.
Basically you went from 8 for the barbell to 30, pretty much almost triple the weight that you've been using.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, no, I appreciate you sharing that. I remember the first conversation. It's when you want to do like specific classes or work towards another goal that may potentially slow down the other goal. Someone just shared this analogy with me this morning. I come from a farming background, so it was another farmer I was talking to, and it was like if you
Mhm.
put two chickens on the ground and you're trying to catch both at the same time, it'll be pretty challenging, right? It's like if you're trying to catch one, you'll catch it and then you go for the second one. So sometimes
Right.
people have two goals that potentially don't align, and it's really challenging to go for both of them. And you exert a lot of energy, right? Like you mentioned before, like you were physically active, you were putting effort into it, into your exercise, you were putting effort into your nutrition, but the body just wasn't transforming the way that you wanted it to. And so now we narrowed it down to one specific thing, and now we've improved the overall of your body and your fitness.
Yeah. I mean, I sort of am one who sort of commits to something to a fault. So I think I
Mhm.
was just sort of following this path of taking certain classes, doing some, interval work to a fault, just because, well, I wanted to please the instructor. I didn't want to hurt her feelings or his feelings. And
Yeah.
it, now I do find I'm more able to sort of question that and do things that are benefiting me, even if it's awkward.
Yeah, well, it's a great place to start the classes, but ultimately, if you're seeking your own shifted body composition and transformation, there's a unique game plan that needs to be structured for you, right? Because in a group setting, you can only push as much as you can because it's an overall group that you have to watch
Mhm.
out for as an
Mhm.
instructor. So it does make it challenging. If you have someone that's a little bit more advanced or that wants to go a little bit faster or push a little bit more, it's challenging to monitor everyone in one go. So I'm happy that you made the switch to having your own game plan because now you're seeing the difference that it's made for you. Um,
Yeah.
so we talked about how much strength training made a difference, how much focusing on proteins made a difference. Is there anything else that was kind of a shock or potentially something you didn't expect when you started working with us? You're like, oh, that's new. I don't see how that's going to help me. And then actually ended up making a difference.
Well, I like the fact that it's this sort of comprehensive structure, and that, in other words, it's not only on the physical, but there's emphasis on the meditation and the cold exposure and the reading. um, you know, I, I sort of have adhered to that and ultimately embraced it. I will say in the beginning, I was somewhat skeptical. I wanted to look into, okay, what's the science behind this? I've actually gotten into, when I'm on the treadmill to complete my steps in the gym, I've been listening to Andrew Huberman,
Yep.
who's, you know, backs a lot of this stuff up. I mean, the cold exposure and the benefits of meditation and um, interviewing experts on longevity. So a lot of it has, in other words, I've become convinced that
Mm-hmm.
these are all positive things. Also, the other big change, ironically, was the water intake. I was drinking very little water. And I rationalize that saying, well, I have a lot of coffee.
That's a
I'm like,
negative on this one.
right, or drinks with artificial sweeteners and things, and so building up to 2 liters, which is what I do now, was a process for me. That was a big challenge, but I really have noticed I feel better.
Yeah.
Like, I think a lot of, I almost think like sometimes with my lethargy and things, was owing to just being dehydrated.
Yep.
So that's also been a change that I hadn't anticipated.
Yeah.
But I like the overall structure. I go, it's sort of yin and yang for me. I have a more obsessive style. So, sometimes counting things like, reading 10 pages or doing it, I back off against. I have been working with Sarah now, with as I'm sort of ending the program and well into reverse dieting on intuitive eating, and that has been very rewarding to me. I mean, I think that's definitely something I can live with, and it mitigates my anxiety. I think initially I had some anxiety just about the whole concept of reverse dieting, and I'm sure everyone does
Most
to an
people do.
extent.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I felt okay. I'm an exception because I asked Sarah. I said, "Well, can I talk to someone who's my age who's gone through this, because I don't know, about, like, what do you mean, like, you keep adding calories? Like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to, gain what little I lost." But she was very patient, and when she introduced this concept of intuitive eating, which means, okay, look, you're going to have you're sort of balancing around numbers. It's not like you have
Mhm.
to hit these exact numbers. That helped me, and it's working for me.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. Right. There's a place for intuitive eating, and it's always after reverse dieting, right? Because once you do the initial fat loss, metabolism slows down. We need to speed it up. And for you to be in a position where when you move into intuitive eating, there's going to be days that are slightly higher, some days that are slightly lower. But if your metabolism is sped up, it can handle those higher increases on some days without affecting your weight drastically. So you're in a much better position. Because I checked your profile, right? You're I think before you came in, you were eating like 12 to 1500 calories. That was kind of like your range. And now you're around 1800 calories after having
Right,
lost the 4 pounds. And you've been pretty
right.
stable for like the past several check-ins, at that 1800 mark with the 4 pound fat loss. Um, and I'm happy you're moving into intuitive eating, because that is the perfect time to do it, is after reverse dieting. Because in order to see a shift in body composition and reverse diet, there needs to be a certain level of preciseness that needs to be hit to be able to do it efficiently, that you just can't get through intuitive eating. So it's much better to do it once you have a raging metabolism that can handle almost anything, and that you've already have the body and the weight that you want.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, it makes me laugh at the reverse dieting, because a lot of people say it as a, can I speak to someone that has done it? Like, how am I going to eat more food and not put on weight after I've worked so hard
Yeah.
to lose it? uh, how was it for you on a week to week basis to see the food increase and to see the number on the scale kind of stay stable? What was that journey like for you?
Um, it was gratifying. I mean, again, like everyone else, if the weight would go up, I'm very cathectic to the scale. I pretty much weigh every day, and that was another challenge that I faced with Sarah, because she said, "No, no, stop weighing yourself." But yeah, I mean, it's been gratifying. Unlike, I mean, my tendency um, is not to sort of throw in the towel and say the hell with it and eat everything. My tendency is to stop eating.
Mm,
So that's what my work was about. Look, you have to convince yourself that there's many variables that play into the number on the scale. You have to distance yourself, not as all the things you've said, not be so emotionally attached to it. Um, and, uh, to sort of trust that it's going to level out and really resist the tendency to want to go back to eating 1,000 calories a day.
Yeah, wanting to make any adjustments that would just bring you back to the
Right,
old version of thinking.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It is pretty challenging to not make emotion-based decisions, especially when it comes to our own body. It's hard for any other area of life, but especially when it comes to our own body. But you're right, a lot of things can affect your weight on the scale, especially if you weigh yourself on a daily basis. You could eat slightly later than normal. You could drink water a little bit later than normal, and the weight's going to be up. You can have a really hard workout session. There's going to be more inflammation, therefore more water retention. Weight's going to be up the next day. But I always like to, I don't know if you ever heard me say this, but I always like to paint the picture of if you were to put on a pound of fat in one day, right? By definition, it's 3,500 calories of energy, right? So you would have to eat 3,500 calories on top of your maintenance calorie, right? Which, like, let's just put at 2,000 for simple math. So therefore, you would have to eat 5,500 calories in order to theoretically put on 1 pound of fat in a day. I think that's would be near impossible. I think for you to eat that much in one day to put on a pound
right.
overnight
And ironically, I would tell people this myself, but practicing that,
is
and
different.
facing my own emotional reaction was another story. It's interesting. Also, I have found that with the input of some sodium, which I was basically little or no sodium prior to your program,
Yeah.
and drinking a lot more fluids, and even perhaps maybe the addition of some healthy fats, which I had virtually, I avoided oil. I was
Yeah.
on AJ's, trying to adhere to her recommendations. And also Sarah's initial recommendation when I described what was going on with me with just pretty dramatic weight fluctuations was avoiding, to an extent, nightshade vegetables, which I seem to be, I don't know, have some reaction to. I found my weight has remained more stable than it ever has, I would say.
With more
Uh,
sodium and more water
right,
versus
slightly
before.
more, exactly, exactly. I think those factors have contributed to that, which is interesting to me.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's essential for it's great for muscle contraction when you're working out in a gym to have some electrolyte through the sodium. So it is really great, especially if you're someone that's physically active. If you're not, I can see why bringing it lower would help. But if you're strength training, you want to build muscle, improve body composition, you need those electrolytes. But when you really think of it, if you're trying to eliminate sodium to near zero,
Mm-hmm.
as soon as you eat something that mildly has any sodium, you're technically drastically increasing by a massive percentage the amount of sodium that's in your body. So therefore, there'll be more water retention. But if you
Right.
consume an average amount of sodium, your weight will always stay within that range. It creates more stability.
Right. And I wasn't aware of that. And that's, been gratifying because I was always, I was always baffled by that.
Yeah. It's the same thing with keto when you really think of it. Um, Keto is salt, and sorry, carbs is salt, and then keto is removing all the salt. So by depleting your glycogen, as soon as you eat a little bit of it, weight spikes up because there's more glycogen, there's more water retention. So it
Right.
feels like sodium is the bad thing. It feels like carb is the bad thing. But in reality, it's just, you know, reacting to how your body naturally stores these kinds of things. So if you have and keep them high, then there's not many weight fluctuations. And yeah, you honestly feel better.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely, again, I think there's a sense of just being healthier, um,
Yeah.
and not living in this kind of extreme.
So what do you mean by extremes? Like
Well,
were you saying what
extreme
you
in
were doing
terms
before?
of no fat, no sodium, um, you know, uh, and and just and again, I wasn't drinking much on top of it as well. So there's this program, I feel, has allowed me sort of just more room to live my life. And
Unless you
even
have a
with
life.
yeah, even with travel. I mean, I've listened to all your, words of wisdom about ways to adhere when you travel, and that's been healthy as well. But it's just been easier, to to live my life with this program than it has in other kind of more extreme things that I've tried to follow in the name of health.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that, because that's one of the reasons why we structured everything this way. And obviously, as you know, and you've kind of verified through Andrew Uberman, everything is science based that we do. So just
Yeah.
Andrew's would be the one validating everything. He does validate everything. So it's a great
Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah.
Um, but that's the big part, right? Is if you have really strict rules to adhere by, it makes it very black and white. Like, if you're on track or if you're off track, but then it is very limiting to have to live that way in any scenario. So I always like to ask people, like, if you are, can you see yourself living your life like that for the rest of your life and actually enjoying yourself, right? Because probably you can, but are you
Mhm.
going to enjoy? Are you going to enjoy social events, family dinners without having to necessarily like bring your own food or make a huge mess out of the kitchen at the restaurant because you want to remove everything? So I'm happy that you're able to travel and kind of enjoy yourself, and that you're on track and you're still, being healthy.
Yeah, I've appreciated gain from a lot of your guidance about, like, okay, how to maintain the protein, which is, again, always challenging, for all of us in the program. And, while just on a day-to-day basis, much less when I'm not at home, which is
Yeah.
often, and, how to do that efficiently.
Yeah, the
Uh,
protein is definitely a challenge when it comes to, like we said earlier, if you consume low amounts of protein, like, you will be healthy. Like, there's a lot of studies to back
mhm,
that up.
mhm.
But in terms of having a body that looks a specific way that we want to see for ourselves, there needs to be a higher intake. And I've been at consuming more protein, I put it that way, for over 17 years now. And I was going to say, I'm not going to say it's going to take 17 years, but eventually you get used to structuring your meals in a way where it makes it more conducive to you to be able to hit those numbers. You
Mhm,
think
mhm.
less of it
Yeah,
and it becomes easier. You just know that instead of having two sweet potatoes, you can only have one, but then you have half a block of tofu, as an example. You sacrifice
right,
a sweet potato for a block of tofu.
right. Yeah, like even today, I know that, there'll be less opportunity, for protein or cooking. So I had, two servings of the veg protein in my smoothie after
Yeah.
my workout, in anticipation of that. So, I mean, it's that kind of sort of adjustments that I'm learning to make,
Yeah.
that I've learned in the program.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with two scoops of protein from time to time, right? I know that you don't do it on a daily basis. And it's shown only in these scenarios where, something comes up and then you have to deal with it the best way that you can. And so,
Right.
yeah. And that's how you ultimately stay on track, right? Perfection is kind of unrealistic to expect that you're going to eat 100% whole food, plant based, clean 100% of the time for the rest of your life. Like, life will happen, will throw you curveballs, and then things will show up that you have to navigate. um, which is actually one thing I want to do a better job at asking members, because a lot of people listen to these interviews, or look at the photos online, and they go like, wow, they must have had a perfect journey to be able to accomplish this goal. It must have been, everyone seems to expect perfection once they start the fat loss journey, right? When in reality, there's no area of life that when you take on something, it'll be a smooth ride all the way through, especially when you're looking at like a 6 to 12 month transformation. Is there anything that has come up throughout your journey that you've had to navigate that had potentially was a little bit challenging at the time, but now you're better equipped to deal with?
Well, as I mentioned, the weight loss phase of the program, and again, I really admire people who have, a great deal of weight to lose. I didn't, but that was easy for me. Again, I'm very compliant, patient. Person. I followed it. Was easy. I followed the meal plan to the T, but where I freaked out, where my anxiety spiked was, oh my God, I've reached my goal. I've gone 1 pound below my goal. And now I have to add in calories. I was very, very anxious about that. And
Hmm.
that was just really a challenge. And to be honest, again, I felt like, okay, the people I was seeing on the, and I'm a lurker. I'm on the group, but I'm always listening to the playback.
Hmm.
And, I was seeing 40-year-olds, maybe some 50-year-olds and 30-year-olds. And how about, yeah, okay. So they're doing great. What about me? What about when I start this reverse dieting phase? So
Yeah.
yeah, that was hard for me, and also hard to be honest, because again, my the irrational side will say, oh, I'll just go back to eating 1,000 calories if I freak out. And no, I can't do that. And I have to be honest with Sarah, and I have to
Yeah.
be honest with myself, because I'm, trying to break those cycles. And that was scary.
Yeah.
And, I, yeah, and I couldn't really talk about it with anyone but the people in the program. It's sort of like,
You have
because
to be
not
in the
many
cool
people
club.
understand.
Yeah, you have
Right.
to be in the cool club to talk about it. Well, I appreciate your vulnerability with that because reverse dieting is a new concept to a lot of people. Most people don't hear of it until they hear it from me or they're in the program. And it is psychologically a challenging one to think we're going to increase food, but I'm not going to put on weight. How to, like, it makes no sense, right? According to society standards when it comes to fat loss and most of the things that we learn about health and fitness. So it is psychologically more challenging. Um, but what you did was the right thing, right? Being honest with Sarah, because your relationship with your coach is a relationship, and communication is important, right? Try not talking to your partner for a week and see how that goes, right? You'll probably have a little argument or some things are going to happen. Same thing with your coach. It's important to be in communication and be like, hey, I'm struggling with this. And we've done this hundreds of times for reverse dieting. So we know that these things are going to come up and it's normal. Um, and a lot of the times, the bumps that happen throughout reverse dieting and throughout fat loss, most of them are psychological. A lot of the times, it's like, yeah, there's an emergency at work, and then I have to move my workout to a different day. But a lot of these things, if we take the time to just pause and reflect, they're very easy to handle. We know how to handle them. But then psychologically, we make them worse by thinking, but I missed it on the day that I was supposed to do the workout, and I'm going to do it tomorrow instead, which there's nothing wrong with that. But we think there's something wrong with that. And then we fall into a cycle of like, okay, I'm going to push it back. Okay, I completely messed it up, and then potentially eat something you're not supposed to, and then just rolls down to something even worse when originally all was needed is a pause. How do I deal with this? And then just following it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm happy you're in communication with Sarah because that's the best way to handle hardship or things that come up throughout the program.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I'd love to ask you, is there anything that really stood out for you or that you've learned throughout the process of working with us that um, was a game changer for you and that you're going to carry with you once you're out of the program?
I have full intentions of, following your quote unquote blueprint. I've always thrived on routine, and,
Mm-hmm.
this is no exception. So I feel fortunate that way. It's not, it's for me, it's a good thing. I mean, granted, when I'm traveling and such, I have to practice more flexibility, but in general, I have every intention of following it. And certain things were already in place, like I'm an avid reader, and I've always practiced sleep hygiene. I recognize the importance. But then other things like, yeah, again, drinking 2 liters of water, meditating at least for 5 minutes a day, if not more, the cold exposure, even though I have to scream every time I get in the shower. I usually wait till my husband's not at home so I can take a
Yeah.
shower. All of those things. I feel like, okay, I feel really good right now, and I don't want to let those things go.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel committed to it.
Oh, beautiful. And routine is a big part of successful people, right? In any area of life and in health, in fitness as well. It's a good trait to have, right?
Mhm.
I don't know if you're familiar with Jocko Willings. He's been on Andrew Berman's podcast several times, ex-Marine, but his
Mhm.
saying is discipline equals freedom, right? And discipline comes to routine a lot of the time. And so it's creating a little game plan for yourself. I'm sure how you structure the routine in the day is different than other members in the program, and that's okay. We have to make it work for our own schedule and how it would fit our current lifestyle. Because like you mentioned, obligations are different with where you're at now versus some of the members that, are 30 and have two kids that are babies, right? They have different levels of obligations and time restraints and things that are happening at the same time. So I always like to ask this question to members on the podcast. Change comes from making a decision all of the time, right? It comes to having a moment of, I just call it like a pivotal moment where something comes up, or we have a thought, or we hear something, or an accumulation of events that bring us to a point of like, I need to change. I need to do something. Right. And you kind of shared your pivotal moment a little bit when it was kind of like listening when I was on the Chef AJ show and it just clicking for you. So if there's someone that's listening that is potentially in your shoes of where you're at before, right? They're eating vegan, they're eating healthy, they're exercising, they're not necessarily noticing the differences that they want. What is something that you would suggest to them to move forward and see some progression?
Just basically one's willingness to try something different. I've always been aware that, if you're, the sort of an adage, stereotypical adage, if you're doing something without any results or the results that you want, you have to have the courage to question that. And you're worth it to question that, to honor
Mm-hmm.
that part of you that has that awareness that I'm not happy now in the situation I'm in, and so I need to do something different to for myself and not for anyone else. Um,
I love that.
and so really having the courage and foresight to say it's okay to stand back and make a change, even if it's not going to please others or surprise others, or it's inconvenient. It's really worth it in the end. And as you've always said, to practice patience along that journey.
Because it is a long journey, right? Ultimately, it's my hope for you is that you continue to live like this forever, because now you're equipped with the tools. And I like what you shared. No one's ever said that before. The ability to question what you're doing, right? I feel like as human, there's an addiction to the process that we're doing because we invested
Mm-hmm.
so much into doing this thing repeatedly to get a specific outcome, and we're not getting the outcome, but we've invested so much that it's really hard to pull back from it, right? If I use an analogy of like a slot machine at the casino, like people are like, I've put so much money in this machine, eventually it will win, right? And they just stay there over and over again. I feel as humans, we do that. We invested so much into a specific method and it hasn't paid off the results, but it's really challenging to pull back because we spend how many hours, how many years of our life trying to do it a specific way without results. So having the ability, the awareness to pause and reflect and having the strength to pull back, I think that would be a big part.
Yeah, I think it's all too easy to follow habits, even if they're very unhealthy habits or habits that are ultimately, not very gratifying or not really leading to tangible results.
Mm-hmm. What's the book? Atomic Habits. You read this book?
No, but that's another thing, I appreciate that I will continue. I tend to read mostly fiction, but hearing from your, listening to groups and such, I've really started to collect more nonfiction. I think the one Leap. Anyway, I've gotten
The
several
Big
of
Leap.
them.
That's a great
Yeah, the
book.
big sleep I just got. But yeah, so that's been a good thing. But no, to answer your question, yeah, I'm not familiar with that other one.
It's basically a great book on forming habits. Um, but a lot of the times, habits, routine, our time is always compared to the analogy of the junk drawer in your kitchen, right? Like you move in, you don't have room for everything yet. And there's just one where all the screws and lighters and screwdrivers and leftover bag and batteries end up in. And then you move out and you just have a bunch of random stuff in there. It's the same thing for habits and routine. Like ultimately, your 24-hour day will be filled with something. And you either consciously choose what's going to fill the morning, the midday, the afternoon, the evening, or it will just fill itself with random items that don't necessarily add value to your life. So if you like, that's why we have the to-do list, right? Like if we block off time to meditate, if we block off time to read, to do our steps, to do our cold exposure, then we start to consciously build it into our routine to allow us to improve. Versus if we remove all of these things, you're going to spend that time no matter what. I don't know what you'd be doing with it, but is it going to be an activity that's going to serve you? So that's why it's important to consciously choose the habit and the routine that we build for ourselves, or else it will be built by default and it might not be something that serves us.
Right.
Yeah. It's a good book to read. Just add it to
Okay,
your list of
definitely.
books. Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds
Um,
good.
Awesome. So Nancy, would you like to leave you with few last words of wisdom that you'd like to share with the audience before we wrap up the podcast today? Right. You're in my book, success story in the program. You lost the 4 pounds, you reverse dieted, you're eating 1,800 calories, got abs at nearly 70. So you've accomplished a lot over a few months together. So I'm curious, like any words of wisdom you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, I've sort of felt like, look, I didn't have that much to lose, but I really feel, I mean, compared to so many in the program, that I've really gained a lot from being in the program, even though, as I said, I haven't been a visually active participant. I've been in the background and really absorbing all the information. And, from someone who came in with sort of a background in nutrition and fitness, and I had the benefit of growing up in a household where health and longevity and fitness were really highly valued. So, in other words, I felt I had all the answers, or I had a good body of information coming in. I really feel I've learned a lot, and I appreciate that. And I wish it for anyone who's contemplating taking that journey and taking the leap.
Thank you.
It's really worth it.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I'm happy that you learned some stuff. And I'm happy that you've been implementing it and you're going to continue implementing it. And
Absolutely.
I want to say a massive thank you for taking the time out of your day to record the
Sure.
podcast with me. I know for a fact that the audience got some value from it. So I want to say a big thank you. And thank you to everyone for listening. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Great. Thanks.